Tēnā koutou, ko wai toka awa, ko Penifan toka monga, ko Gail toka iwi, ko Kileen toka hapu, ko Kileen toka whānau, ko Tipene Kileen toka ingoa. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. That was my pepeha, or personal introduction. Pretty common to start a meeting with that, or a mihi, a more general greeting in New Zealand these days. And it's one of the more obvious ways that Te Ao Māori, or the Māori world, has influenced the way we go about our business. Probably less obvious is what we call Māori tikanga, or Māori values. And there's a particular value I want to share with you today. It's called kaitiakitanga. And it talks to an expectation or a value that we are all guardians of the land, the sea, and the skies. And it's relevant today because it talks not only about our corporate responsibility, but our personal obligation and expectation to look after the planet for future generations. And at the end of the day, why wouldn't we? We work in some glorious places. Whether it's Fiordland National Park, where we look after the roads and the avalanche program, whether it's Antarctica. One of our telco technicians, Daniel, recently went on his 13-month deployment, what we call fly out and forget about me. We won't forget you, Daniel. But glorious part of the world. We work in the Pacific Islands. The photo there is out in Samoa, where we rebuilt the runway. We're currently in the Solomons, Niue, and the lesser-known Pacific island of the Chathams. And we work all across New Zealand in our various roles. I guess the key factor a lot of these have in common is they're all under threat. So we see less snow in Fiordland, but more rockfall. We see a receding ice shelf in Antarctica. We see floods in the Pacific Islands, and we see increasing storm intensity across New Zealand. The photo at the bottom right is our team in Gisborne. They are currently clearing up after recent storms in what we call the recovery phase. And then we'll go on to resilience, which is rebuilding it. There will be, in a very small space of time, if you like, a few days of weather, 200 million of damage. So that's effectively what we're facing in these glorious places that we work. I'll come to our sustainability journey, but first, just so you understand the New Zealand business. So we have 3 divisions. I'll wander around if that's okay. We have transport, utilities, and facilities, align very well to the divisions in Australia. So we talk about New Zealand and Australia. We're actually not separate businesses. We work in a very aligned way, sharing resources, and increasingly developing strategy. So we have a group strategy across these activities. I'm hoping this year we nudge 3 million of revenue, and we look after 10,000 people. Our divisions are pretty well balanced, and they're pretty well placed for what New Zealand needs. In terms of our work in hand, we have 6 billion of work in hand. That's secured work in hand. We also have contract extensions. Now, we would typically be 90% confident that we'll get our contract extensions. So effectively, our work in hand expectation is about 9 billion. So we effectively have 3 years of work locked in ahead of us. In terms of who that's for, 80% plus is for government or government-related entities. The balance is private sector. The 3 private sector clients that we're doing most work for at the moment is Vodafone, Microsoft Corporation, and PowerCo. In terms of the balance of work in hand, it kind of reflects the balance of our business. But the key growth area, I believe, is utilities, because utilities will be benefiting from water reforms and also some climate change funding that is coming down the pipeline. So let's talk about that government policy. So post the Paris Agreement, the legislation of that was put into an act in 2019, and that committed us to net zero by 2050 and a 30% reduction by 2030. At this point, you're probably thinking Rick's slide saying 50% reduction is wrong. It's actually not. That was corrected post-Glasgow, where New Zealand committed to a 50% reduction in emissions by 2030. Now, the slight challenge to that is the green box is the Ministry of Environment's predictions under current policy settings. And without boring you with too much detail, our emissions in 2005 were 83 million tonnes of carbon equivalents. Now, that gets reduced somewhat by our forestry, so we get about a 15 to 20 million tonne offset, but it still leaves us with a big number. The targets there on our current trajectory mean in 2050 we will only just have achieved the goals that we're aspiring to achieve by 2030. So that brings us to the next bullet points on this slide. We need a change to our emissions plan. And this is coming out next month. So it will come out in May. It will focus on a number of sectors, but including, from our perspective, transport, energy and construction. And it will change the settings to get us on the right trajectory to honour our 2019 commitment. We're also seeing what's called a national adaptation plan. So last year, New Zealand went through a risk assessment around climate change risk. It identified 43 priority areas and 10 critical areas. So this will address how we're tackling those. No particular surprises in that. The 10 risks really talk about the risk to the ecology, the risk to our personal safety, and ultimately the risk to the economy if climate change impacts remain unaddressed. And as you'd expect, New Zealand has signed up to the UN sustainability goals. Today we're focusing more on climate change goal 13, but we have started to do some detail around our commitment as Downer to all the sustainability goals under those rather unusual UN definitions. So that work's in progress. So what are we doing? So in New Zealand, we talk about being very green, but actually 60%, give or take, of our energy requirements still come from fossil fuels, largely related to transport and manufacturing. So it would be incumbent on us as an organisation to address our in-house activities first, which basically comes down to our carbon emissions from fleet and manufacturing facilities. So what we've started to do is to revolutionise our light vehicle fleet more to EVs. We're well down the track of that, both in actual action, and you saw our blue MGs in the photo earlier, but also in planned action as capacity of vehicles comes online. We'll be trialling our first EV ute later this year. We're also looking at our heavy goods fleet. Again, we're seeing a lot of potential both in hybrids, but also improved engine emission capacity. So we're moving next year to some hybrid trials, but also to Euro 6 engines. Euro 6 engines meet the Clean Air Act from a European point of view. They represent a 70% reduction on emissions versus normal heavy goods vehicles. We're also looking at our manufacturing areas. So the tank here is a refurbished fuel tank that now runs off electricity. That was done in conjunction with the Energy Commission, who we're working with to go through our manufacturing capability and to electrify it from other fuel sources. Now that's significant because actually New Zealand has a very good story to tell in electricity production and the renewal capacity of that. So 84% of our electricity is green, which also gives us the capacity to produce green hydrogen down the line. I'll talk to the photo first because I think in order to go on this sustainability journey, you need an ecosystem of suppliers, willing customers, but also people that challenge you, people that bring you thought leadership. This was an ESG panel that we ran last year. Michael's up on one of the screens there. Michael was under fire, but did a great job in representing Downer. The other screen's a chap called Andrew Grant. Andrew Grant's the global partner of government and infrastructure development at McKinsey. We have Anne-Marie there from New Zealand Super, their responsible head of responsible investment, and Louise Francis from IDG. And the final person in the picture is Mark England. Mark runs Genesis Energy. 51% owned by New Zealand government. And Mark has the challenge of being renewable on one side of his business, being a key provider of hydropower, but also on the other side of the business, he runs the coal power plant that supplies the 5% of New Zealand energy that's still generated from fossil fuels. Now, conversation with Mark led to the fact that he is driving a different agenda for Genesis Energy, and now he is working with us to ensure Downer from 2025 can buy fully endorsed renewable energy or renewable electricity. Now, if you think about what that means, currently our emissions are 118,000 tonnes in Downer, New Zealand. Most of it is about manufacturing. In fact, 99% of it is manufacturing and fleet. If we can change our fleet to a power source that is clean, we can really make a dramatic change. So it's actually taking what is an aspiration to a reality, but it requires an ecosystem of people. It's also good when you can do the odd project for those people. So the picture on the left there is actually one of Mark's hydro schemes. So this is where we're putting some gates in to control earthquake surge on the water. But it's on a hydro project, 190 megawatt, feeds circa 124,000 houses. So supplies energy to 124,000 houses. If you prefer to think of that in EV mode, the other picture is a wind farm we're currently building in Turitea. That's for Mercury Energy. And that provides enough energy, 220 megawatts, which will power 375,000 electric vehicles per year. Moving on, this next project it's a big one for our New Zealand business. And we've been involved from the very outset. So CRL is the City Rail Link. It's New Zealand's biggest transport project. It will enhance our public transport network in Auckland. The real sustainability story is it takes ISCA, the Infrastructure Sustainability Council framework, which basically allows you to take good practice to the ground, good practice to projects. And it looks at ecology, it looks at stakeholders, it looks at social outcomes. And it's something we adopted on the early stages of this project, which was called C1. But basically the work's under Britomart Railway Station to start the tunnelling work. On this project, we used our Green Vision capability, which is a recycling company we run, which basically takes materials out of the ground that would normally go to landfill, recycles them into engineering quality material. We convinced the project it was a good idea. We convinced the customer it was a good idea. We convinced a partner in the concrete business that it was a good idea to use recycled aggregate. The outcome was a 55% reduction in emissions through not extracting virgin aggregate and also reducing transport. So as a consequence of this and lots of other activities in terms of water reuse, not using diesel for power, using electricity in preference, resulted in an excellence award under the ISCA standard. We're now adapting this through the project, and this project in the whole will be somewhere between 3 and 5 billion. I'll keep the range wide. In terms of final outcome costs, we will be involved in 90% of the delivery of this project with our partners. And we are continuing to use recycled materials, and we're actually setting the benchmark for how projects can be delivered in a sustainable way. Another one, I think this is really exciting. This is New Zealand's first Green Star building. It's for Auckland University. We have a bit of a partnership with the university where they keep giving us projects to build. We built the engineering block, which is to the left of this picture. We're currently building the recreation centre, and this is the social sciences block, affectionately known as Building 201. The really unique thing about this is we didn't knock down the old building. We stripped it back. We took it back to a concrete frame. We used reinforcement textile and fabrics to reinforce the existing frame so it met seismic standards. And now we're building it out again. So what you're seeing at the top picture is the facade has just been completed. So this will look and feel like a new building. It will be on the old concrete frame. We haven't knocked it down. We haven't sent the materials to landfill. We haven't had the emissions coming back in terms of materials. and it will function, actually it will save 60% emissions in the build. In its running, it's actually designed to reduce, versus a normal building of similar ilk, sort of 70% reduction in operating emissions. And I actually think it's one of the best examples of a brave client and actually a very committed construction team to do this challenging projects, but with huge sustainability benefits and a positive outcome. So there are a few case studies. We've got many. But the New Zealand market is, as the Australian market, we're well placed. The market as a whole, addressable market's always a tricky thing, but the market as a whole, about 27 billion in terms of what we physically can do. We choose not to do a lot of it, either because of quality of client or because of quality of contract. So even though we only represent 3 billion of that 27 billion, we are the market leader in infrastructure delivery in New Zealand. So we are the biggest provider of integrated infrastructure. We also work through all elements of the cycle. So we enable design. I say we enable, we do good design management, we have good temporary works design, we have some niche aspects of design like pavements. And we also design manage in terms of taking BIM from the design office to integration. We're not bums on seats designers. We build, we maintain, and as we've demonstrated, we operate. So for example, on CRL, we'll be maintaining the stations for their 25-year life once they're built. In terms of a forward trajectory, the market without climate change budget is due to grow at a CAGR of about 3%. We'll grow slightly ahead of that because of our market position. So we expect to grow at a CAGR of about 5%. We do have some choices to make on where to next for New Zealand. We've gone through quite a growth. So we've effectively doubled our revenue in the last 6 years, largely on the back of acquisitions like 10X, Hawkins, Spotless. So we've got some choices to make. Key thing for us is actually to capture work in the right way. Most of our work is repeat business. Most of it is early contractor involvement or negotiated. Most of our service contracts are rolling over, in many ways uncontested through the tender process, just put through a value for money lens. So we are well placed in many ways for growth and for certainty of a prosperous future business. In terms of the work we do, we'll continue to have projects that are multimodal in shape. So the one here with the tree, you can actually see that's actually traditionally would have been a motorway build. It's now a cycleway and a waterfront area that adjoins a motorway and a railway line. So our work in its core will become more multimodal by nature. We do expect the water market to expand, particularly with water reforms. The complex looking plant there you see is a thermal dryer, sustainable at 2 levels. Firstly, it takes human waste that would have gone to landfill, turns it into pellets for fertilizers. But more critical on this plant is it's designed to run off hydrogen. So when our hydrogen capacity comes offline, this plant can run off it unencumbered. The other two, well, this is where I do some work with my friend here, Steve Kakavas. We're kind of joined at the hip at the moment. But the first one is some I guess, thought leadership work we've been doing with Kiwi Rail. So we have an interesting topography in New Zealand, and Steve's team did some work, and they've designed this loco concept to move freight around the country, and it will use a small backup diesel engine, battery storage and overhead electrification in small parts of the network. It will reduce our emissions by 90% and the fuel bill by 6 million per year. So massive impact on Kiwi Rail sustainability goals, a massive impact for New Zealand in taking freight off the roads, putting it on rail, but servicing it on rail in a way that's sustainable for the future. And then the bottom one, I spoke to someone at the break about Auckland Light Rail. That's the next big transport project. potentially hasn't got bipartisan support yet, so it's a bit of a watching brief. Quite a complex project, but I think regardless of what shape, what form, whether it's light rail or just the future of transport corridors, will be in the mix. So I guess in summary, New Zealand, business-wise, we're very aligned to my Australian colleagues. We share lots of good ideas. We have some really good things in the water and rail space particularly that we can bring from Australia to New Zealand. We are well placed for the future. I think we can run a financially successful business, but we can do it in a way that enables society to thrive. Thank you.